today that these players need to prove that they can stay in your fantasy lineups, or even for that matter, on your roster in 2023. My player that I'm talking about today is Juju Smith-Schuster. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. Wide receiver for the New England Patriots. It's not every day you go from the best quarterback of our generation to a fringe QB3 for fantasy who may not even play past 2023 in Mac Jones, although I am hoping for upside in Mac Jones in his third professional year. But before we change this into an entire wide receiver episode, he was my candidate for this. Players who need to prove they can be in your fantasy lineup or on your fantasy roster. It was going to be Mac Jones. So a sneak preview if we ever do a QB one. But with that being said, Juju Smith-Schuster is 2 years removed from his last top 20 finish. And you might be asking yourselves, well, wait a second, Gabriel. Juju Smith-Schuster finished as the wide receiver 27 last year. That's at least a solid wide receiver 3 at best. Sure, you're absolutely right. But the chances are in the 3 games that Juju Smith-Schuster really balled out last year, he was probably on your bench because he just wasn't producing when he was in your lineup. So it was kind of one of those hit or misses. Maybe it was a bye week and you had to put him in your lineup, but chances are he was sitting there just wasting those points away, and it didn't feel good for you, and it didn't feel good for your fantasy lineup. Now, I do think he is great. Yes, I say this. Juju has been, I planted my flag on Juju Smith-Schuster, has been one of my favorite players since he's come into the league. But I do think this is a prove-it year for him. He signs a 3-year deal with the New England Patriots, who a lot of question marks are still surrounding. They just gave Devontae Parker 3 years, $33 million. They might still be in the DeAndre Hopkins sweepstakes. We don't know. Is Quentin Thornton going to break out in year 2? There's a lot of question marks. Are they going to run the ball less? Are they going to throw the ball more? We don't know what the New England Patriots offense is going to look like, but we do know one thing. It can't be as bad as it was last year. With that being said, I think Juju Smith-Schuster has a lot to prove going into 2023. He's not going to be in my lineup come week 1. I like guys like Zay Jones, Brandon Cooks, Elijah Moore, Quentin Johnson, who we were just talking about. This last one I'm not going to say, but think about those names that I just said. None of them are wide receiver 1s for their team. Juju Smith-Schuster, for all intents and purposes, as of right now, is a wide receiver 1 for his team, and I'm considering starting them over Juju Smith-Schuster week 1 and for the first few weeks of the season until we see Juju Smith-Schuster do what he can do with the football and provide for your fantasy team. The last guy I was going to say was Michael Thomas. He hasn't played in 2 years, but even then, I think Michael Thomas with Derek Carr is someone who I would trust more at this point, and that really, really hurts me to say, but those are just some of my thoughts. And Juju Smith-Schuster, a player that needs to prove they can be in your fantasy lineup in 2023. Jacob, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, if you would have done this topic every year for the past 4 years, he would have been.
Hey, you stop it right now.
Hey, but I like
mouth.
Juju. I like Juju as a person. You know, I like when he does interviews. Like, he just seems like a cool guy. Like, he even when they were asking him like, "Oh, you're gonna come back to the Chiefs," he's like, "Let's run it back." But like, obviously, it didn't work out. He's got to get paid, right? So the thing for me is, everybody keeps, you know, I listen to a lot of fantasy podcasts, and a lot of times they all say the same thing, like, ironically, right? Like, it's like they're mimicking each other. They all say, "Oh, if Juju Smith-Schuster can't produce with Patrick Mahomes, he can't produce with Mac Jones." I'm like, it's not as simple as that.
Definitely not as simple as that.
Just because you're playing with the best quarterback doesn't mean automatically correlate to, like, you know, better production compared to playing with a guy like Mac Jones. I look at it this way. And on the Chiefs, like, you got Kelsey, right? You got the running backs, you got McKinnon. Like, not that they have a bunch of dynamic receivers, but they have a lot of wide receivers, right?
And Mahomes, who throws the ball
Mahomes spreads the ball around. He spreads the ball around, and he's always done that. How many of these MVSs, you know, random dudes, like, there was I forget all their names at this point, but every year there's like 2 or 3 random wide receivers that like become flex options on the Chiefs because Patrick Mahomes is so good and he spreads the ball around, right? So basically, Juju Smith-Schuster was a little fish in a big pond on the Chiefs. He goes to the Patriots. Now I think he can be the big fish in the little pond, meaning maybe, I mean, look, Josh McDaniels isn't there anymore, but maybe Juju Smith-Schuster can bring back some of that Julian Edelman magic and be this slot wide receiver guy that hyper targeted 10 targets a game. What if he comes in, hypes up Mac Jones, like, gives him a lot of confidence? You know how Juju is. He's a hype man. And maybe they all of a sudden Juju becomes the focus of their pass game. And whereas Patrick Mahomes is spreading the ball around, maybe Mac Jones is just feeding Juju 7-yard games, like eight catches, 77 yards, and a touchdown. And it's like, damn, okay. All of a sudden, Juju's a solid wide receiver too. So from that logic, that was a very positive take on the situation.
No,
right?
Jacob, that's what we need. We
need
positive takes.
He still needs to prove it.
He still needs to prove it, Jacob. You're absolutely right. He still needs to prove it. That's why he's my player who needs to prove it in 2023 that he can be in your fantasy lineups this upcoming season.